and that's why we're going to be successful. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about types of undercover investigations I've been involved with and what the types of investigations animal rights organisations do. Okay, you perhaps the sort of general feeling is, it's a lot of watching and looking and hiding in bushes and like binoculars and all that kind of stuff. And there is a bit of that, particularly for things like circuses. I spent my fair time in hedgerows, for a few days watching circuses so that I can document like the 23 hours of every 24 that, elephants are chained up, just the little clinking of their chain, just, moving left to right, just resonating in my ear the whole time. You're same with the tigers, periods of rest outside the ring. It's not rest. I mean, it's just pacing cages up and down, not a paw pad out of place. 1, 2, 3, change, same again. It's just so, tragic to watch. A lot of trailing as well, a lot of livestock trails. I've done a lot of those over the years. And those are quite tough because, you have to trail a truck from, say, Belfast right down to southern Italy, and, not lose that truck and not get detected by that truck because you want to try and show where the failures are and the breaches so that you can put it back in the front of lawmakers to say, this is why you have to end live transport. So there's been a lot of that, and I've lost a few vehicles, plenty of vehicles in the night, and I've even followed the wrong vehicles thinking I was following a livestock trailer. I'd be following a refrigerated truck, and 6 hours later go, oh God, it's a waste of time. But then I've also had moments where I've been able to get close up to the animals, and that's really important to me, to document their suffering, to give them water when I can intervene. And like I say, investigations, you have to be pretty robust to do it because there aren't many opportunities to intervene. These type of projects are all about documenting, so you can end systems, You might not be able to do something good at that point for a group of animals or an individual animal, but you might be able to do something very great for their whole species. So you have to look at it like that, which is, again, it can be a bit tough because our natural feeling is want to intervene. Overt or covert, like I say, overt, you're very open about your filming and investigation techniques, or covert, very secretive, finding ways into places. I think a lot of people perhaps also think about, undercover investigations for animals as, running into factory farms in the middle of the night and running out again with what material that you've got. And of course there is some of that, but actually it's a hell of a lot more sophisticated than that. It's really quite sort of technical, and there's a lot of thought going into it. The next one, infiltration. Sadly, this is the thing that I specialised in, and I feel bad for being able to do that work because it does require you to spend long periods of time with your adversaries and to live like your adversaries, to think like your adversaries, to dress like your adversaries, and sadly, on occasions, to eat like them too. But those are some of the things that you kind of have to do in order to expose what's happening and to provide that information to the public, as it's material that is inherently in the public's interest to know about, and of course for them to make an informed decision and hopefully go on to change their behaviour. So infiltration normally involved, for me, long periods of time away from loved ones, often at the far corners of the earth. I've worked a lot in the US, infiltrating fur trapping gangs and all kinds, and learning, like I say, to see how they operate, because when you learn how they operate, you can then see their world for what it really is, and you can break through all the industry sort of marketing that's associated with their products. You really do see what it's like on the ground. And of course, you not just seeing what happens for the animals, but you're also seeing the behavior of the human. And for me, that's always actually the worst thing about doing this work, I think, is just the failure of humans, and to be compassionate and to just be so ready to take out their frustration and violence on an animal when, you know, it's already in a situation where, you know, it is going to be killed. So you see the worst of people and you see the worst of people. And that's why it's saying that it's, you know, you have to kind of be fairly robust for this work and see the bigger picture the whole time, because that's what you're working to. Camera placement. I would say, again, Animal Aid are really skilled operators. A good friend of mine who's now retired, you know, probably as an organisation you owe him a great deal. He did a lot of work for you around the CCTV, slaughterhouse projects. I was glad I could assist him on some of that project. But, you know, those camera placements inside slaughterhouses, they were revolutionary for, you know, documenting what happens in slaughterhouses. And they were really, you know, tough projects to conceive and undertake. But, you know, without that, as you mentioned, you know, there would be no CCTV in slaughterhouses, and while slaughterhouses still exist, workers know that they're being watched, and that is a bit more of an improvement to, you know, what goes on in slaughterhouses. At least people know that they're being watched. And also, it's been something that, you know, other animal groups around the world have used. You know, they've seen how that campaign and how effective it was, and they've, you know, repeated those tactics. So, you know, like I say, Animal Aid do really lead from the front on some of these techniques, and that was a good example of it. I've done a little bit of camera placement, but my work is, I've done a bit of everything, but it's the infiltration. So it's the sort of using cover stories, quite, you know, complex, convoluted cover stories. I'll explain a little bit more about those as we go along. But one thing I was also going to say on that front, it's not all camera work, it's not all getting the imagery. You know, desk-based investigative work, research is really, really important too. You can learn so much from, you know, making those freedom of information requests. You can piece things together, and you can, you know, you can really undermine the industry that way. And I'm happy to say that I saw just this week that Animal Aid had done some of that with the port and down work. You know, that's going through files, asking questions, piecing it together, and coming up with the truth. So yeah, it's not all cameras. There's way more to it than that. Okay, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the covert camera kit. So this is what I'd be wearing, you know, for a long assignment overseas. Like I said, for example, working with fur trappers, where I would be a fur trapper as well, and I'd be running a fur trapping line of, you know, maybe 100 miles with 80 traps set out, and I'd be like secretly documenting everything that happens over those weeks and months with the way the fur trapper behaves and how he works. And then I would jump from different fur trapping gangs in different states. So I'd have like 4 or 5 projects on the go across the states, and I'd spend like a couple of weeks with one, and I'd go back to another for another week, and then another for 2 weeks. And gradually I'd start building this big evidence bank of what life was like for America's wild animals. And it was, you know, truly, truly terrible. And but this was my go-to piece of equipment. Now, it's basically just a sort of digital video recorder on the right-hand side there. That's where, you know, all your material, all your imagery is being stored. That's where you put your, you know, your SD cards. You probably got those, and maybe some of your cameras at home and stuff. So that would be where you record everything and store everything. Then the leads running down there, they'd be like your buttonhole camera. So instead of this mic, I'd have one in this little like shirt button here. So there'd be a camera in here. and then I would modify whatever outfit I had to be using. If I was trapping, it would be, you know, like a heavy padded check jacket, you know, trucker's cap, grizzly beard, you know, all that kind of stuff. But that would be running the whole time, and I'd have the digital video recorder like sewn into my jacket. I have like batteries close by where I can access when I need them. Slaughterhouses, I would use this in as well. A little bit more complex because you're kind of having to modify the clothing a bit that they give you. It's got more and more harder to do those type of projects, I would say. But yeah, this was, you know, this is, I mean, talking about a piece of equipment like this, you know, and a shirt camera, small, doesn't make a big bulge in your pocket, you know, it's not going to get noticed. I mean, I'm paranoid all the time. I'm going to get caught, you know, and someone's going to spot it. And of course, I'll perhaps tell you about some of those incidents later. But day to day, you know, you can feel comfortable wearing this. When I first started, it was a whole different story. This was much bigger, much bigger, and the batteries are much bigger and much heavier. And I'd have to like modify a lot of things. And I'm only a small guy already, so you know, I was carrying about 50% more body weight on me just for these, you know, this AV equipment. And it was really not reliant as well, because, you know, the wiring would go wrong, and suddenly like you'd have these batteries in your underpants in the middle of a slaughterhouse, and they would be like going from like 15 degrees to like 60 degrees like in a few seconds, and you'd just be like trying to find an exit point, a toilet cubicle to sort things out. So yeah, a lot's changed, and I think because a lot's changed, that's what's helped us get into so many different places and document so much more in much more technical ways, and has led to, you know, these projects being successful for a lot of different organizations. Personal risks and challenges of working undercover for animals. Well, I've spoken a little bit about that. You know, I suppose that the first challenge, the first obvious risk is liberty. You know, you are running a risk with your own liberty, for the liberty of animals. And I wouldn't be stupid. I'm a very patient person, and I knew these projects would take quite a long time, and I would never rush anything. I would allow for times when, you know, cameras would fail. I mean, I've lost a lot of footage to cameras failing, which could have made, you know, a much bigger improvement. But you have to understand that you are going to lose some footage during these projects. But yeah, liberties, yeah, it's definitely you've got to think about it before you start doing this work. You know, you've got to consider, you know, what kind of family arrangement you have, how long you're prepared to be away from home, what are the risks of working in this country against this country. I'd done several projects in Turkey, and Turkey has the worst record for imprisoning journalists. I mean, I am a journalist by profession, but, you know, journalists in certain countries are obviously not welcomed as much as perhaps they are in the UK. So yeah, you have to weigh up those risks. I also weigh up yeah, the types of laws that are in certain countries. Sorry, did you have a point?
I was wondering, in this country, is most of what you do actually not against the law?
Yes, that's what I was going to say actually. In the UK, well, in a lot of my work, I've always tried to work within the law because I'm trying to change laws. And if you're expected to try and change the law to like compromise it in some way, it's going to backfire on you. So wherever possible, I try and, you know, work within the law. And I know that sounds tough, maybe even thinking about getting some hold of some of this footage. Trespass is an area which I'm very comfortable abusing, I suppose, especially if something is in the you know, the public has a right to know about this. That's one of the good things in the UK. We do have quite good laws for public right for information? Is it in the public interest? And a lot of this type of the subject matter and this work has been sort of deemed within the public's interest to know about, especially when it's food. So I felt more comfortable working there. Like I say, in the US, I'm really nervous working in some states because of, they have these laws called ag-gag laws. And they're laws that have come about by the farming industries and the meat industries saying, we don't want this type of material shown in the media. And as such, we want a bill to go into place which stops anyone coming onto our property and showing this type of material to the wider public. It goes against, I think, the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, the sort of right to free speech and stuff. And that's why it's being overturned in so many states. But those sort of big agricultural states where factory farming is, everyone's a factory farmer and everyone's mother's a factory farmer and so on. It's providing more of a chance to remove. But, someone like me there could face quite a hefty prison sentence, for showing the public what happens on a day-to-day place. And there's no federal laws for animal welfare in the States either. So, it's really tough making sort of prosecutions there. So you have to think very careful about those places where you're going to work. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one of the projects that I was involved in. Only on a small level. Like I said, there was a really great investigator doing this work, primarily most of this work for you. But I was able to support a little bit for this project. But, this was like a really sort of revolutionary campaign. Like I said, making sure that you get evidence not just from one place but multiple places. And Animal Aid have been able to get footage from slaughterhouses in the UK over the past decade from 7, 8, 9, 10 maybe now. 10 is it? I can't remember now. It's probably up that way. But yeah, this was then followed up with a really good team effort of campaigning. It doesn't happen overnight, but it did come about, and it was a bit of a landmark decision. Big impacts in the media, a backlash as well, obviously, from the meat industry, and they went to quite significant efforts to try and kick it into touch. And like I said, it's a project that's kind of been mirrored overseas. So I think the fact that you're supporting an organisation like Animal Aid and a project that they've done here is percolating out into other animal rights communities across Europe and further afield, where they're learning from this type of project and being able to achieve the same things and starting to create the same sort of results. Is really testimony to what you've been involved with. The next image was the one I was going to mention with the graphic advisory. It's from BOWOOD Slaughterhouse. This was a sort of a second phase of Animal Aid campaigning, which resulted in very sort of significant, tangible outcomes. It was actually a tip-off that came to me, and I was working with someone else at the time, and they weren't comfortable with using sort of camera placement in slaughterhouses. So rather than lose the lead, the tip-off from the whistleblower, I was able to pass it to Animal Aid, who then went about and got this really, incredible footage and campaign. So I think that's, again, a nice thing to sort of perhaps highlight about how organisations are able to work together as a team. One organisation may not be able to carry out that particular piece of work because, it's not an area or a remit that they feel they've got, but, able to pass it on to another organisation who has a remit that can do that. That sharing of intelligence and information, really, goes out right across our community, and some leads come to nothing, but others do, and this was one example of it. So I'm just going to talk about a few projects that I've done and just try and perhaps give you a bit more of a sort of a personal insight as to how I've gone about it and maybe what I felt from doing it. Broiler chickens, the most, apart from aquaculture and fish farming, this is the number one farm animal used in agriculture across the world. And I was working in the US. And for this project, rather than get a job, because you could get a job, that's one of the techniques of getting this kind of footage, rather than getting a job, because I was concerned about, that ag-gag legislation bearing down potentially on me, I tried to buy the factory farm. So, I managed to get a significant collection of documents together to show that I was probably worth about $3 million. This is my only smart shirt, by the way, so I don't have such a bank account. But for the US, this particular farm that I did, and I kind of evaded the company because the chicken companies in the US, it's like a roost ruled by just a handful of companies. Big names, Tyson, Purdue, Pilgrim's Pride. And they all work to the same formula. They own everything. They own the farmers even, because they're not their farmers. They're like contract farmers that rear their chickens and then give them back on slaughter day. So they supply everything to these contract farmers. They rear them on, they give them all the feed, and then they go back to the meat companies. But they were really switched on about people like me trying to get jobs in farms. So I figured, well, why don't I forget those guys at the top? I'll just go to the contract farmers and look for farms that are up for sale and then try and buy them. Obviously, I wouldn't go that far. But it did allow me then to, get a flavour and insight into how these farms work. But part of my assignment was to get footage from about 20 chicken farms across several states in the US. One of the things about broiler chicken farms, and when you investigate them, is we all know about the suffering, but the worst suffering shows up sort of towards the last week of their lives when their skeletons just cannot cope anymore with the amount of growth, and of course they're all collapsing and failing to get around what little space that they have to move. So I had to find a way of making sure that my visit was timed to the day before those chickens were going out to slaughter. So I couldn't just buy a factory farm. I would have to talk to them about all the feed lines, over a series of conversations over the phone. It took 6 or 7 months for me to get access to this farm. And, I'd be asking them about, all the maintenance. Does it come with a cruster machine? How many times am I going to get drop-offs of feed? But in between all that, I would say, just how old are the chicks at the moment? And they're like 3 days old. So I go, okay, and so is the barn included? Is it a separate barn, or what about the woodland that comes with it? So at that point, I know how old these chicks are. So I won't be going to that farm for another 37 days. So then I'd have to make sure that my visit coincides with them, being there 37 days later. But yeah, that's the sort of thinking you have to kind of use to get yourself in a position where you can, I guess, see the worst of the system. I mean, I say the worst of the system. I mean, broiler chicken farming is horrendous from day one, right from the hatchery, of course. But the biggest impacts show up in those last sort of week to 2 weeks. And these people that own these farms, like I said, they're almost like babysitting the chickens for the owners. They don't have any interest in chickens. These farmers would say to me, oh yeah, you only need to check the chickens once in the morning, then you can go out fishing or bake a cake or You know, that's what I'm going to do later. You know, and we'd be walking through the sheds, and you know, be walking over the dead birds, and he'd be kicking his feet through them like, you know, just like leaf litter on a forest path. And you know, he wasn't interested in these. He was just, you know, doing what he wanted and not feeling under that much pressure from the company either, because they're not making regular visits to the farm. And this happens like, you know, over 25,000 farms in the US. You know, these guys were called Chip and Bob. That's not their real names, but it wasn't far off that. And they, you know, there's many of those Chip and Bobs who don't care about animals in the first place, let alone to rear them. So I'm just going to hop on because I've just noticed the time a little bit. Again, I did similar projects with pigs in Europe, investigated a lot of the prestigious ham companies coming out of Italy. I'm not going to mention any names, but I think you probably know who I'm talking about. Yeah, again, you know, projects where, you know, I'd spend a lot of time trying to get undercover as an agricultural researcher, doing a big research project, and making sure that my cover story is watertight. I always like research the industry so I know it inside out. I never want to get caught out on any questions. You know, they have to know that I'm exactly who they think I am, and that takes time. But one of the things that you do learn, it's made me a better campaigner because I understand how they think, but I also understand where they think their weak points are. And that kind of knowledge is invaluable because it's a rare insight into people that we fight tooth and nail against every day. But it's only by spending time with them, like I say, with a cover story, that you're going to learn that information. And then that information can get passed on, and your campaigners can use it to their advantage and, you know, create the campaign package that's going to work to take on those weaknesses. So, you know, those farms are really, you know, Italy has this whole, you know, sort of everything's wrapped in a Tuscan sunset, you know. But for food, for farm animals, it's not. It's factory farming is at the heart of everything, and just like it is in the pig industry. This is you know, I think a few years ago, this was an issue. About 10 years ago, I became aware of like factory farming of rabbits. And it wasn't many people I knew about who was sort of like raising it as an issue to work on. And I was like really sort of pressing quite hard for like campaign organizations to work on it because there's actually more rabbits in cages than there are egg-laying hens still in Europe. Over 330 million factory farm rabbits just in Europe. France, Italy, Spain are the big players. You know, China is just massive. And everywhere in between, you know, Africa, it's starting to boom. But, you know, rabbits, such docile, sweet creatures, you know, not that any animal is, you know, suited to factory farming, of course, but, you know, these are one animals that, you know, you should never be farming. Even the rabbit factory farmers say that they're delicate and the mortalities are so high. You know, they also all kind of admit themselves that, you know, this is an industry that's really tough on the animal. And, you know, 5 years ago, we didn't really know too much about it. But since then, you know, a few organizations have done big exposés and investigations into it. I'm pleased to say that from a UK perspective, it's not an industry that we have anymore. We had a couple of players a few years ago that was still farming, some for meat, but also passing them into the research industry. One of those has definitely dropped out. The other one may have done too. But, you know, it's a different story across the channel. You know, there's a few farms just outside Calais, you know. So, you know, you'd be surprised what's factory farmed. You know, it's not just chickens and pigs. It's rabbits and quail. You know, quail is another project I did in the same vein as this. It's sort of the secret side of factory farming. You know, millions of quail being reared as luxury food products in the most awful of conditions. Battery cages, barren battery cages, really terrible stocking densities. really, really tragic stories. But gradually these stories are percolating out into the mainstream, and supermarkets are dropping quail meat. The European Parliament, after some of these projects, have agreed to ban rabbit factory farming, phase it out like we often hear, but it's on the move. And for this project, I saw all kinds of awful things: artificial insemination, really, really terrible. And again, for this project, I was trying to start a factory farm. I mean, the quail farm was the same. I was trying to set up a quail farm in the UK because we don't have many. So I went to go and meet a cage manufacturer who builds the cages in Italy and supplies them out all over the world. And I was going to have to spend 150,000 euros to get me to quail sheds. All a fabrication. But I made sure I got a really hefty discount because I didn't want to profit from my fabrication. So I worked really hard until I got a 20% discount on a £150,000 quail farm. But there's lots of stories that come out of this, and then you learn new leads. I mean, quails are being factory farmed in the Middle East, not for humans, but to supply feed for falconry, which is like the king of sport, sport of kings. And quail again, they have such a wonderful voice. I don't know if you ever heard a quail sing, but to hear them singing along a factory farm is just a really dispiriting thing to hear. And they make migrations. This is a bird that migrates, from Europe down into Africa. Has been kept in a tiny cage. The only migration they actually make, ironically, is that they do end up in Africa, but just on a piece of styrofoam. Because they're popular down there. But for other skills that you needed for a project like this, good working knowledge of a second language, working with fixers. I often use fixers who are like animal activists that, bilingual, can help me with a car, help me find technical information, whilst my languages are okay. When you have to talk technically about how many milligrams of antibiotics you have to put into a rabbit farm in the first week of production, I need some help. But those fabrications and those extra elements to investigations, help you get further and further and further and discover new layers and also form new leads. I mean, one of the things that I would do with these cover stories would, once I've got in with one person, I'll get them to find me someone else. So then I can go and have that door opened by someone else. And then it's like a chain letter, So then they're doing the work for me to help me expose what they do. So, again, some of the sort of nitty-gritty behind the scenes.